Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast, a show for people interested in wild birds. I'm Susie Buttress. As a casual birder, I try to find time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. Join me each week to hear about the birds I've seen, interviews with others, and stories from listeners around the world. Amy Chillag is a writer and producer for CNN Special Projects. I recently read an article by Amy about the power of birdwatching as a route to stress relief and for peace of mind. That article resonated so much with me. I love birdwatching as a pastime, and when I'm stressed, I seek out moments in nature, listening to birds and watching their behaviours, and focusing on that seems to refresh my mood and help me feel more resilient. I was excited to speak with Amy and find out what noticing wild birds had meant to her.
I've always, I think most of us yearn to be outdoors. We spend so much of our time, in our houses, driving to and from work, in the subway, on the train, and just that lack of wind and breeze and sun and just getting outside. And that's really, how my attraction to birds got started. Even at a young age, my dad encouraged me. And I don't know if everybody even has this. Parents that say, we want you to be outdoors. So we had a little house in South Florida, and my dad would encourage me to lie in our hammock and look up in the tree. And, very early on, I would fall asleep to the sound of birds. And back then I don't think I really noticed so much their color. And I wasn't like a bird geek, so to speak. I didn't go running to my books to look up the types of birds. It just brought me peace of mind. And then later in life, I moved here to Atlanta in the United States and bought a house. I have a beautiful, deep backyard with a lot of old trees and started noticing all the activity. And my partner, Wayne, bought me some binoculars that are awesome, that are 10 times, magnification. And I was able to see so much and stare at the feathers being blown by the wind and all the different types of birds. And then I got some books, and it was fun identifying them and saying, oh, does it look like this? Does it have this stripe on the wing? Does it have this type of beak? And I never looked back.
That sounds so wonderful. I really love the idea of your father telling you to lay in the hammock and just watch and listen. I could imagine spending summer days that way. That would just be beautiful. Can you tell me some of the birds that you have in your backyard?
Yeah, I have a lot of woodpeckers, the hairy woodpecker, and we have suddenly I've forgotten the name of the smaller woodpecker, not hairy.
Downy?
Hairy is the big one.
The
downy, thank you. Yes, and this proves that I'm a casual birder, that I don't memorize these real quick. I have the downy woodpecker. We have the red-bellied woodpecker, which is one of my favorites. And it's so funny that it's called red-belly, because most people wouldn't necessarily notice these very light red spots on its kind of light gray belly. You mostly notice this red stripe on its head. And we have nuthatches, which also has that cool stripe down the center of its head. But I love when birds display differently when they're male and female so dramatically. We have tons of cardinals. The red male cardinal versus that kind of light orange cardinal with the orange beak is the female. And I have titmouse. I have many. I have at least 30 species that come to my backyard alone. Chickadees and kinglets, those cute little kinglets. Bluebirds, which I think are my favorite because of that brilliant blue against that rust-colored breast.
So over 30 species in your garden. I'm very, very impressed.
It's not due to any particular skill on my end.
Do you put out food for the birds, or is it something to do with the number of trees and the types of plants you have in the garden?
Well, only this past Christmas did my partner Wayne buy me a bird feeder. It's my first bird feeder ever. And we were late getting around to putting it up. Put it up only 2 weeks ago. And so, yes, at least it used to be 20 species. Now I have 10 more because of the feeder, which is so amazing to me. I never got a goldfinch in my life in my backyard. And, there's this brilliant yellow faced and chested with the black wing and the white bands on the wing. So tiny, so cute. They come to my feeder all the time, the male and female, and pine warblers and yellow rump warblers. I never got so many types of warblers before. Dark-eyed juncos. So it's partially the feeder that's bringing so much more in. Although I feel a little guilty, Susie, about having the feeder sometimes. I Googled, whether it's a good idea to have feeders, and it's a mixed bag. From Audubon and others, they say it's wonderful to help the species at times when things are a little lean, to give them extra food. But you don't necessarily want to bring the species all together, because there are certain diseases when you're bringing them close by that otherwise they wouldn't come in contact. And then sometimes there's bird fights, right? You got the red-winged blackbirds are very assertive. They come in big groups and they kind of fight off the others. But generally it's very peaceful. They kind of come one at a time, and they, wait out their turn in nearby trees, and then come swinging on by. And I wouldn't take it away for anything, because it's so much fun.
I think you're right. I think that there are pros and cons to feeding. I think it's key to make sure that you practice good feeder hygiene. So making sure that you don't allow food to become moldy, and to make sure you've got fresh water available for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know what? I've got to get water out there. Glad you mentioned that.
But yeah, I think especially in America and the UK, we're very much encouraged to put out food, because one of the things it does, it draws birds closer to people, and it then fosters more interest in doing things to help conserve birds. I'm so jealous of all the birds you're seeing. Do you have hummingbirds there?
We at times, this past summer, we didn't have the hummingbirds that we had the prior summer. And I don't know why, but yes, we have had them in the past, and they're, as you know, so magical. You can't believe such a tiny little creature, and you are beating their wings so terribly fast, and the sound that they make when they buzz off, when they zoom straight up into the air and can zoom straight down to you. You just can't believe it. You know what I did see that showed up, which was what my dad jokes around and calls it great God almighty bird, the pileated woodpecker. I had never seen a pileated woodpecker. I'd only seen it in my books, and with the long head and the very long, the huge, I mean, they're, what are they, 18 to 22 inches long. They're huge birds, and they have the same woodpecker black and white stripes and just those crazy heads. And one day I heard this crazy squawking in my neighbor's yard. And it was just, I knew it was a type of woodpecker, but it was just so loud. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I think that's going to be like a huge woodpecker. And I looked up, and there they were. There were two of them with the huge heads.
Oh,
and I was like,
but you were really pleased with yourself, were you? That you actually thought to yourself, I feel this is what it is. And you look up and it was.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I would love to see those. They look like amazing birds. My friend who lives in Savannah says, because he's got one that comes to his garden, and it caused quite a bit of damage to one of his fence posts. So he always loves seeing them, but he knows that they can produce quite a lot of damage.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they can shred a tree very, very quickly. But it's fine. They're in your neighbour's yard. So
exactly.
I can tell from your voice how passionate you are about seeing the birds. Yes. Could you tell me a little bit about the article that you wrote?
Yeah, well, what I wanted to do is let people know that, at least for me, that whenever I walk out my back door, I have a nice sunroom that my father helped me build, and it's a lot of windows, very high, big windows, kind of cathedral style, so they can look up into the treetops. So it's even wonderful to just lie here lazily and look up into the treetops. But when I open that door, it makes a difference. The wind comes in, I step up onto the grass, I hear the rustling of the leaves, and I just wanted people to understand how much it has helped me. As I had shared in the article, my mother passed away about a year ago, and very untimely. And one of the few things that helped me is to be able to step out and just let nature soothe me, right? It's like a self-soothing, to feel that breeze and to hear the rustling of the leaves and to see. And then that mindfulness is really what I focused on in that article. And it turns out I'm not the only one. That when you see a bird, you don't see it yet, right? You see a movement in the leaves. It's almost like a game. So you have to use all of your senses to really focus on what am I seeing, and then keep your eye on that point and bring those binoculars right up to your eyes and use the focus wheel. And there it is. It just, rewards you. And really, it's my form of mindfulness. I literally could feel my muscles relaxing and my shoulders come down, and I'm able to, just exhale, really. And it just happens naturally. And then the bird is just, I don't know. How can you explain, Susie? It's just this little creature, this life that it's almost, and I'm somebody who likes to use a lot of words. I don't know how to describe the feeling. I feel joy in my heart when I look at them. And really, any stress or I'm actually quite a nervous person. The nerves just dissolves, that feeling of nervousness. And I feel like this can be something that we all can do. And really, very much it's about being in nature, being outside.
Tell me, do you spend most of your nature time in your garden, or do you go out on walks?
I would really like to go out on more walks. Because I'm so, in a sense, I'm lazy because so many birds do come here. And with the bird feeder, that really kept me at home. I was getting sort of tired. I was like, well, I've seen these same 20 birds over and over. I'm going to go hit the main sites that Audubon says is great in Atlanta. And there are, 5 or 6. And as soon as the bird feeder came, I stayed because I said, my God, look at all the variety. So now I'm back to just staying in my backyard.
But, there's something wonderful about living somewhere where you can just step outside and see all this life going on around you. Now, earlier on, you mentioned about when you were lying in the hammock or just being out in the garden, that you used all your senses to look at the birds, to hear the birds, to feel the binoculars while you were focusing. But I was really interested in that when you said that you hadn't used books to try to identify the birds. You were just experiencing and enjoying what you were seeing. Did you have any categorization naturally in yourself about how you separated the birds?
Yeah. Color is always the first thing I've noticed. So I remember seeing the brilliant red of a cardinal, and when the light hits it a certain way, it's on fire. Even its little crest looks like the top of a fire. So yeah, I think I just noticed the color a lot. I even wrote in the article about seeing the color of a bluebird is like this indigo that just pops. And when it's sitting in a green tree, you just see it stand out like a painting almost. So yeah, the first thing I just noticed is the variety of color, the flashes of yellow from all these warblers. It seems like almost all warblers are yellow. So yeah, I would categorize them that way. And then it became kind of, in a sense, easy to just, my father brought me a book. I'm lucky to have naturalist type friends and relatives around that encourage my habit, because I don't know if I would have intellectualized it all. But it's really fun, right? I don't go any deeper, really. I just say, wait, I hadn't seen that particular bird. Oh, yes, like the differences between a house finch, a female house finch. The male here, I don't know if you have those there, look like they're dipped in raspberry sauce. It's just this gradual, like purple red that appears on their, it patches on their face and their chest, and then it dissolves out into sort of brown and white stripes at the bottom. Well, the female just has a brown and white kind of mix, and they have that finch, that triangular finch beak. Well, there's also a pine siskin, which is like, it looks exactly like the female of the house finch. And the only difference is the ear patch. Well, it's so much fun to say, well, can I, it's almost like being in elementary school. It's very elementary to say, does this look like that? And it feels good. It's almost like the whole movement with all of us using adult coloring books is, there's something about going back to our childhood and says, does this look like this? It doesn't require much intellectual ability. You just look at a picture in a book, and I have 2 of them, so I get to look at the one that's a photograph and one's a drawing in case I can't tell too much of the difference, and say, look, there's the ear patch. Oh, it really does bring you back to an early joy.
I really love that you're doing all the things that maybe some of the really expert birders are doing, and you're doing them naturally. So it just shows that you don't have to be intimidated by by the idea of the books or by identifying the birds. And there is a certain joy to know a little bit more about the birds you're seeing. You can, of course, just look at them as they're there, but to find out a little bit more about, oh, well, that's a pine siskin or that's a female house finch, and know that while they're both finches and they'll both eat similar kinds of seeds, they'll have different aspects to them that definitely tell them apart. And it's a bit of a sense of triumph, isn't it, when you manage to identify and know that you found that difference.
That's the other thing. It rewards you not only with the beauty, but you say, oh my God, I observed something. I had, the idea of using, by the way, your keen the sense of observation, the idea that you're using, your ability to notice differences, it feels good. It feels like there's a part of brain that's being massaged that we don't massage that often anymore.
Absolutely. And I think also it goes back to the mindfulness in that you're concentrating so hard on what you're looking at that all those other thoughts and things, well, for me, all those other thoughts that are in my head that I don't want to be dealing with just go because I'm focused on just the birds that I'm seeing.
Exactly. And it's definitely like one of the guys in the article that I wrote, he said, for me, he goes, I like yoga, but I'd rather be outside. And yes, the idea of yoga is that you have one focal point. You really just so focused on these positions that it's to the exclusion of all other thoughts that are coming across your mind, whether it be doubtfulness or sorrow or worry about what's going to happen in the future. It forces you into the present. And that is what birding does. Several people describe that they have to use their ears. They have to use their eyes. They have to really, there's so much focusing going on as you're trying to follow a bird as it's jumping so fast or hopping up a tree and all these different behaviors that you learn each different type does that you really cannot think about anything else. And that's what true mindfulness is and being in the moment. And for me, it releases stress.
All those things you're describing, there's not only the observing the colours and the shapes of various parts of the birds to try to identify them, but then there's the behaviours that they'll exhibit, and you can just let that wash over you and just watch. But I know that your mind will also try to make sense of what you're seeing, and so you'll start to realise that, for example, with the nuthatches, that they'll have a very specific behaviour compared to, say, the woodpeckers you're seeing or the finches and how they feed. You'll start to know and become, you become very familiar then, don't you, with what you're seeing. So then if something new turns up, the very fact that it's not doing what you are used to seeing, you can then focus on that and work out what that is.
Yes.
In your article, I know you mentioned people that do some walks or get together as groups.
Yeah, I found out that our Fish and Wildlife Service does a survey every year, I think. And they found that some 9 million Americans that regularly observe birds are between the ages of 18 and 35, or the so-called, I think that's millennials. Well, for sure it encompasses millennials, if not the beginning of Gen Next. And I've read articles beyond my own to indicate that there are groups going out, particularly in New York, which is a surprise to many that New York City is such a hot birding site. Because it's such a concrete jungle, so to speak, which I love, but because they have Central Park and all these other smaller parks, like the one that I pick up in the article, the Brooklyn Bridge Park, because they have that, it's a stop on their way south from Canada. The city is very young, and young people pick up on this, and boy, they talk about how much they need to see nature when they're, taking the subway or coming to and from work into their tiny little apartments because you know how expensive New York City is. They're forced to get outside because they're living in little squares in the sky. And so we're talking about an increase in appreciation amongst young people.
That's really wonderful because it can traditionally be seen as an old person's sport. It's something that older people will do. And it's the same in the UK as well. There are so many young people getting involved in birding. And it's great because it's something that actually can bring generations together.
One of the other aspects of my article looked at, first of all, on a grand scale, the importance of nature to our health. It's only over the last 20, 25 years that they're pulling together studies that show repeatedly how much sustained exposure to nature for human beings affects our health, affects our cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It brings that stress hormone down. They have measured this through this woman at the University of California's San Francisco Children's Hospital. Her name's Dr. Nushin Razani. She's a pediatrician, and she started the Center for Nature and Health because she wants to make sure that kids are getting more exposure to being outside for several reasons, kids and their parents. One, because when you're outside, you're much more likely to be active and moving your body. When you're inside, you're much less likely because of the confinement. You're much more likely to be watching television and playing video games and that kind of thing, not really moving. To be outside is to have an expanse. And that's actually kind of rare if you don't live in a city with safe parks, or if you don't have a patch of green grass in your backyard that you could perhaps run and play tag. So that's one of the things I discuss in the article, and her research is there, that within 15 minutes of being outside or being in a natural setting, any kind of natural setting, she says you see cognitive benefits. Your ability to solve puzzles, she says, increases. And around the same time, your blood pressure improves, your pulse slows down. And over several times a week, whether you're walking in a park or even going in a forest, over longer periods of time, you actually start to see improvements in cardiovascular disease and even longevity. We're talking about how long you live. And there are hundreds of studies that they have. So the idea that to be in nature really is a nature prescription, they're starting to call it in America, where doctors are actually writing prescriptions saying, I need you to be outdoors 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes. This is what they're starting to do as we try to get away from taking too many pharmaceuticals and this kind of thing. And then I found through your own University of Exeter in England that a study just in 2017, there was a survey of more than 270 people throughout southern England, a variety of towns throughout southern England. They found that people that lived in neighborhoods with more birds and tree cover are less likely to have depression, anxiety, and stress. And that's even after controlling for a neighborhood's poverty level and other demographic factors. Because sure, you might say, well, you know, a poorer area, you're more likely to have mental health problems, you're less likely to have tree cover, and et cetera. But no, it's adjust for that. So they say there's something about that that's good for us.
But that's really interesting about how much being out in nature can affect your health in a positive
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah. The other thing that this doctor mentioned, she's amazing. She did a TED, we call them TED Talks. She's saying just the idea of being amongst something that's alive. It sounds funny, but you know, of course your children are alive, or your mate is alive and your dogs are alive. And that brings, you know, obviously a certain amount of joy to you. But to be outside when you're in an office, there's like nothing living but you and the people you're working with, and maybe a plant here and there, which is, by the way, why increasingly people are bringing plants into an office setting. But to go outside and see, you know, just a patch of grass, she even mentioned, and just feel the breeze a little bit. Anybody can do that, do their own experiment and see how much better you feel. It just happens naturally. Take a nice, deep, full breath of that air when you go outside. You don't have it in your house. I don't feel it right now. I'm looking out my windows into my backyard. I have all these windows. You know, it's not the same. To open that back door and to feel there's an electricity, you feel a difference. And I feel better right away within 3 inches of that door opening. It's really remarkable.
Your words are also so wonderful in describing what you're explaining, because I'm there with you as you were saying, you know, I just need to open this door and I can feel the breeze come in, and I'm like, yes, open it, I can feel it.
I know, I'm staring at the door going, open it.
Thank you so much for your time today, Amy. It's been an absolute joy speaking with you.
Oh, so much fun for me, Susie. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Amy gave such wonderful descriptions of the birds she sees in her backyard. And I loved the steps she describes of noticing the birds, listening to their sounds, using the binoculars, and noting key features for identification. I hope we'll hear more from Amy and the birds she sees, and do also read Amy's articles. You can find the links in the show notes. Recently, I took an unplanned break from recording the show as I was experiencing some throat problems that affected my voice. I'm pleased to say that I'm now almost totally recovered, but during that time of illness, I very much enjoyed seeing what was happening with the birds in my garden. As the spring progressed into summer, I spent many hours watching the birds and noticing the changes that occurred. There was an increase in feeding in the garden, and the rooks and jackdaws visited most days, taking away nearly all the suet each time. One rook in particular started training me to provide a personalised food service. It would land on the decking railing outside of my kitchen window, and if it saw me inside, would move closer to the window to make sure I had seen it. I'd then open the back door and throw out additional suet pellets and mealworms. When I opened the door, the other birds would fly off, which meant that this one rook could take all the food for itself. I recently travelled to California, and just before I went, the first fledglings were appearing in the garden, robins, blackbirds and starlings. And the calls of the young starlings remind me of Mays of my youth, which were traditionally exam time. In California, I also noticed fledglings being fed by their parents, the house finches in San Pedro, western bluebird in Lake Arrowhead, and bush tits in Pasadena. I recorded lots of bird sounds and a few interviews, and I'll be sharing those in upcoming episodes. We have a nest box with a camera. Earlier in the season, some great tits had built a nest in there and had laid eggs, but for whatever reason, that nest wasn't successful. When I came back from California this week, I saw a great tit going into the bird box, and so I turned on the camera to check out what was happening. There were 2 baby birds in the nest, both looking like they were ready to leave, and that evening I turned the camera on again to show my husband the birds, and there was only one left in the nest, so they were clearly about to fledge. We hung around watching to see if we could see that one fledge, but it stayed in the box, and the parents, which had been calling at it all afternoon and taking food into the box, but not necessarily feeding the chick with the food, did start to feed the chick again, so I imagine that one stayed until the next morning. It was wonderful, though, to find out that we had had a successful nest this year. One of the things I particularly enjoy is the sense of achievement I get when I use the clues given by birds to notice other birds. For example, a few weeks back, I was replenishing the bird food in my garden feeders. The red-legged partridge was in the garden at the time, and I kept noticing that it turned its head sideways to look up at the sky. It did this several times. Sometimes it would look with its left eye, and sometimes with its right eye. I glanced up a couple of times to see what it was looking at, but the sky was cloudy and bright, and I couldn't see anything. But the partridge kept looking up, so I took a longer look, and really high up I noticed a sparrowhawk circling. The sparrowhawk didn't seem to be a threat at that moment to the partridge, but I was glad I'd noticed and interpreted the behaviour of the partridge, and from that had seen another species. I love to hear about the birds you're seeing. Barb, from central Illinois, told me, "I was looking out our bedroom window this morning, admiring the good job the rain had done filling up the bird bath for me. Then I had a few surprises. There was a fat little rabbit down there cleaning up the birdseed off the ground, and the first male hummingbird I've seen this year was drinking thirstily, on and on. As I watched, a goldfinch flew in and sat balanced on a wisteria branch. We hardly ever see them, so that was a real treat too. The birds just kept moving in. There was already a house sparrow there, as usual, but then comes a white-crowned sparrow. And wait, there's a house finch and a fat robin. I wanted to take a picture, but my camera was downstairs, and I didn't want to miss any of it. It was so beautiful, I just stood and stared." Thanks so much for sending that in, Barb. I absolutely know the feeling of wanting to capture every moment to share with you all, but sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes we should just look and take the sight in and remember it in our memories. Alan from Savannah told me, "This morning I sat on the porch and listened to the dawn chorus. Some red-bellied woodpeckers were calling and pecking, cardinals were singing, wrens were fighting, chickadees let out warning calls every time we stood up. Right now there's a brown thrasher sitting on the fence, making sure the coast is clear before breakfast. I love the thrashers because their long beaks pull the grubs from deep. Sometimes they'll pull something up that feels like defending itself, and they almost look really happy when there's some sport to their meal." Thanks for sending that in, Alan. I love the description of the thrashers fighting against the grubs that they're pulling out of your lawn. I'd love to know what birds you've seen this week. Join our Facebook group to discuss this week's episode, or post your photos of the birds you've seen. I really do enjoy hearing your tales, so come and join the conversation there. Find us at facebook.com/groups/Casual Birder Podcast. I also have a page for the Casual Birder Podcast, and please come along and like that. But if you can join the group, please do so, because we can have proper conversations there and share our sightings of the birds that we see. Every Wednesday, I post a bird ID quiz. It's based on the photographs that I've taken or my husband has taken, but sometimes I'll use photos that people have sent in to me, and I try to make them not too difficult. So do look out for those on #WhatBirdWednesday. And if you want to just try some of them out, you can look back through the previous week's ones. Follow me on Twitter at @CasualBirderPod or on Instagram at @CasualBirderPodcast. And you can email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen. And if you enjoy the show, please consider posting about it on social media. Personal recommendation is such a valuable way of helping others to listen. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeved Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at www.dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder Podcast.